God understands your pain. He sees, He hears, He heals. Have you ever been at a point where it feels like the weight of the world is crushing you? Maybe life has thrown more at you than you can handle. You feel exhausted, physically, mentally, and emotionally, and you wonder if anyone truly sees your pain. If you're being honest, you might even feel as if God is silent, distant, or that your prayers are going unanswered. But I want to remind you of something today, something deeply comforting and real. God sees your pain. He hears your cries. He knows exactly what you're going through. And most importantly, He cares. If you're tired, if you're weary, if you're struggling and feeling overwhelmed, God knows. He's not only aware of your pain, but He's actively present in it, walking beside you, waiting for you to trust Him with your burdens. And when you do, you'll find a peace that surpasses all understanding, a peace that only He can give. So let me ask you, what if you could leave it all in God's hands? What if, instead of carrying that weight alone, you could surrender it to Him, knowing that He sees, He hears, and He will never let you go? In the Bible, we're promised something amazing: God's love, His presence, and His provision even when we feel like we can't go on. But how do we access that peace? How do we learn to trust God in our deepest pain, especially when we feel so tired? Well, that's exactly what we're going to dive into today. I want you to know this: God sees you, He hears you, and He knows exactly what you're going through. He hasn't forgotten you. You're not invisible to Him, and He's waiting for you to let go of that burden and trust Him fully. Today, we're going to look at what the Bible says about God's presence in our pain and how He promises to be there for us, no matter what. We're going to explore 7 powerful truths that will help you understand that God knows you're tired, and He is ready to carry your burden if you'll let Him. So grab a seat, take a deep breath, and open your heart to what God has to say to you today. Let's walk this journey together. Number 1, God sees your pain, understanding the omniscience of God. When you're hurting, when it feels like no one understands your pain, one of the most comforting truths you can hold on to is this: God sees you. You are not invisible to Him. He sees every tear that falls, every heartache you carry, and every silent cry you've made when no one was around. And you know what? God's sight isn't limited by time or space. He doesn't miss a single thing. Now, you might be wondering, how can God possibly see me? I'm just one person in a vast world. How could He really understand the depth of my pain? But the beautiful truth is that God's sight is not like ours. His sight is full, complete, and personal. He sees all, every struggle, every trial, every burden that weighs you down. Let's look at what the Bible says about this. In Psalm 34:18, we are told, "The Lord is close to the brokenhearted and saves those who are crushed in spirit." Isn't that such a comforting promise? God doesn't just see us from a distance, observing from afar. He is close, near to the brokenhearted, ready to comfort those who feel crushed by life's challenges. You might be in a season of deep pain right now. Maybe it's a broken relationship, the loss of a loved one, a financial struggle, or emotional exhaustion. Whatever it is, God sees you. And not only that, but He is present in your pain. He's not standing at the sidelines watching you suffer. He's right there beside you, holding you in your grief, your exhaustion, and your confusion. The Bible tells us in Matthew 10:29-31 that God even knows the number of hairs on your head. That's how intimately He is connected to you. He doesn't miss a thing. And when we look at the story of Hagar in Genesis 16, we see how God saw and heard her in her distress. Hagar was a servant in Sarah's household, and when things got unbearable, she fled into the desert, feeling like no one cared. But God met her in the wilderness and spoke to her, reminding her that He saw her and that He had not forgotten her. She named God El Roi, which means the God who sees me. Hagar's pain was not unnoticed by God, and neither is yours. Maybe you feel like no one understands what you're going through, but I want you to hear this. God sees you. Every moment, every sigh, every broken piece of your heart, He sees it all, and He is with you in it. Take a moment to let that truth sink in. The God of the universe, the creator of all things, sees you. You are not alone in your pain. Number 2, God hears your cry, the power of prayer and God's response. Not only does God see your pain, but He also hears your cries. How many times have you been in a place where words failed, where you were too weary to even pray and all you could do was cry out to God in silence? It's in those moments when our hearts are heavy and our words are few that God listens the closest. He hears every cry, every plea, and every desperate prayer. In Psalm 18:6, David wrote, "In my distress I called to the Lord. I cried to my God for help. From his temple he heard my voice." God isn't a distant observer of your struggles. He is a compassionate listener. In fact, he is waiting for you to call out to him. He wants to hear from you, especially in your times of trouble. And you don't have to have the perfect words to pray. Sometimes all God needs is for you to cry out in sincerity, and he will hear you. You see, prayer is not about impressing God with how eloquent or well-constructed our words are. It's about connecting with him in the rawness of our emotions, in our pain, and in our exhaustion. Romans 8:26 reminds us that, in the same way, the Spirit helps us in our weakness. We do not know what we ought to pray for, but the Spirit himself intercedes for us through wordless groans. Even when we don't have the words to say, God's Spirit prays on our behalf. When you are weary, when you're struggling to find the strength to speak, don't be afraid to cry out to God. You don't have to have it all together for your prayers to be heard. In fact, God is especially close to those who are brokenhearted and hurting. He listens, he hears, and he responds. Every tear that you shed doesn't go unnoticed. It's precious to God. One of the most profound stories of God hearing someone's cry is found in 1 Samuel 1 with Hannah. Hannah was deeply troubled because she couldn't have children, and she poured out her soul to God in a way that made the priest Eli think she was drunk. But Hannah wasn't drunk. She was desperate. She was crying out from a place of deep anguish and pain, and God heard her. Not only did he hear her prayer, but he answered it in a way that brought joy and fulfillment to her life. God didn't ignore her. He saw her tears, heard her heart, and responded in his perfect timing. Perhaps you feel like God isn't answering your prayers, or maybe you're in a season where you don't feel like praying at all. But I want you to know that God is not ignoring you. He is listening, and he is always near. He hears your cries, and though the answer might not come immediately, we trust that God's timing is perfect. Whatever your cry looks like today, whether it's loud or soft, brief or long, know that God is listening. His ear is bent towards you, and he cares for you. He is not distant, and he is not indifferent. He hears you. Number 3, God knows you are tired. The promise of rest. There's a deep weariness that can settle into our hearts, isn't there? Life just seems like a never-ending cycle of struggles, whether it's battling with anxiety, working tirelessly to provide for our families, or dealing with personal hardships that seem to pile on one after another. And in those moments when we feel drained, physically and emotionally exhausted, it can seem like there's no escape, no relief in sight. The world demands so much from us, and sometimes it feels like we've given everything we have. So where do we turn when we're at the end of our rope? Here's the beautiful truth that we can hold on to. No matter how tired we are, God sees your exhaustion, and he is offering you rest. Rest not only for your body, but for your soul. And this rest isn't just a temporary fix. It's a deep, fulfilling peace that comes from trusting in him. In Matthew 11:28-30, Jesus offers this invitation. "Come to me, all you who are weary and burdened, and I will give you rest. Take my yoke upon you and learn from me, for I am gentle and humble in heart, and you will find rest for your souls. For my yoke is easy and my burden is light." Isn't that a beautiful invitation? Jesus is saying, come to me, lay down your burdens, let me carry the weight for you. I know, sometimes it's hard to believe that we can truly find rest in the middle of our chaos. Life can feel overwhelming, and the pressures of the world can make us feel like we're constantly on edge. But God's rest doesn't come the way the world's rest does. The world offers temporary distractions, fleeting moments of relaxation. But God's rest goes deeper. It restores our hearts, it revives our spirits, and it provides lasting peace. This is rest that doesn't fade once we wake up or return to our responsibilities. This is a soul-deep rest that only God can give. Psalm 23:1-3 tells us, "The Lord is my shepherd, I lack nothing. He makes me lie down in green pastures. He leads me beside quiet waters. He refreshes my soul." In the midst of all the noise and pressure, God leads us to a place of stillness and peace. He restores our souls. When we are tired, when we are weary, we don't have to find rest in our own strength or in worldly distractions. We can find it in Him. Isaiah 40 verse 29 to 31 further confirms this promise. He gives strength to the weary and increases the power of the weak. Even youths grow tired and weary, and young men stumble and fall. But those who hope in the Lord will renew their strength. They will soar on wings like eagles. They will run and not grow weary. They will walk and not be faint. If you feel like you've reached your limit, remember this. God has an unlimited supply of strength, and He is ready to renew yours. God doesn't expect you to carry it all. He is waiting for you to come to Him with your tired heart and soul. He wants to give you rest, real, true, and lasting rest. Number 4, letting go and trusting God with our pain. One of the hardest things we face in our pain is the struggle to let go. We often feel like we have to carry it all ourselves, like it's our responsibility to manage everything and figure it out on our own. We hold on tightly to our worries, our fears, our doubts, and our pain. But the truth is, holding on so tightly only makes us more exhausted. It wears us down, body and soul. Let me tell you something that might be hard to hear. You don't have to carry it all. You don't have to solve every problem, fix every situation, or bear the weight of the world on your own. God is offering you something much better, the chance to release it all into His hands and trust Him to handle it. In Proverbs 3:5-6, we are given this beautiful instruction. Trust in the Lord with all your heart and lean not on your own understanding. In all your ways submit to Him, and He will make your path straight. This is a call to surrender. Surrender our need for control, surrender our worries, and surrender our pain. But I know it's not easy to do that, is it? We often fear what will happen if we let go. Will God really take care of it? Will things work out if we trust Him? And here's the answer. Yes. Yes, God will take care of it. We have to remember that He's in control, not us. Our understanding is limited, but God's wisdom is infinite. When we trust Him with our burdens, He promises to take care of them, and He will make a way where we can't see one. In Philippians 4:6-7, we're encouraged. Do not be anxious about anything, but in every situation, by prayer and petition, with thanksgiving, present your requests to God, and the peace of God, which transcends all understanding, will guard your hearts and your minds in Christ Jesus. You see, when we give our pain and struggles to God, we receive something incredible in return, His peace. It's not just any peace. It's a peace that doesn't make sense in the middle of hardship. It's a peace that guards our hearts and minds, even when everything around us is chaotic. This peace comes from trusting God and knowing that He has everything in His hands. I know it's hard to trust God fully when you're hurting. We often want to control things ourselves, but here's the truth. When you release your pain into God's hands, you are inviting His divine help, His guidance, and His peace into your situation. God doesn't want you to carry your burdens alone. He wants to carry them for you. Remember the words of 1 Peter 5:7. Cast all your anxiety on Him because He cares for you. God is waiting for you to bring your pain, your worry, and your fears to Him. And when you do, He will take it from you and give you His peace in return. Number 5, God's timing, trusting His perfect plan in the midst of pain. It's one thing to know that God sees your pain, hears your cries, and offers rest. But sometimes there's one thing that we struggle with the most, His timing. In the midst of our suffering, when we feel like we've been waiting for what seems like forever, it can be hard to understand why God doesn't just fix things right away. Why doesn't He answer our prayers immediately? Why do we have to endure the wait? I want you to understand this. God's timing is perfect, even when it doesn't make sense to us. We often see the pieces of the puzzle from our limited perspective, and we want everything to be fixed on our own timeline. But God sees the bigger picture, and He is working things out in ways that we can't always understand in the moment. The Bible reminds us in Ecclesiastes 3:1, there is a time for everything and a season for every activity under the heavens. Life isn't a series of random events. God has a plan, and everything happens in its right time. Even in the waiting, God is doing something. He is shaping us, preparing us, and bringing about His perfect will for our lives. Sometimes we get frustrated with the wait. We want relief now. We want the pain to end today. But remember, God is never idle. He is at work, even in the silence, even when it feels like nothing is changing. Romans 8:28 gives us a precious truth to cling to in the waiting. And we know that in all things God works for the good of those who love him, who have been called according to his purpose. This verse doesn't promise that everything will be easy, but it does promise that everything, including our suffering, is part of God's plan to bring about good in our lives. It's also important to recognize that God's timing is about much more than just our own needs. It's about his larger plan for his kingdom. And sometimes we don't understand how the pieces fit until we look back. Think about the story of Joseph in the Old Testament. Joseph endured betrayal, slavery, and imprisonment. But when the time was right, God elevated him to a position of power, saving not only Egypt, but also his own family from famine. Looking back, Joseph could see how God's timing had been perfect. But in the midst of it, he couldn't have known what was coming. You may be in the middle of a painful season where you can't see the purpose behind it. You may feel frustrated with the delay. But remember this, God's timing is always perfect, and his plan is always for your good, even when you can't see the way forward. Trust him in the waiting. He is working behind the scenes, even when you can't feel it. Number 6, the peace of God that transcends understanding. Now that we've talked about God seeing your pain, hearing your cries, offering you rest, and helping you trust in his timing, let's talk about the incredible gift that God offers you in the midst of your pain, his peace. The peace of God is one of the most powerful gifts we can receive, and it's something that the world can't offer. It's a peace that doesn't make sense in the chaos of life. It's a peace that transcends all understanding. In Philippians 4:7, Paul writes, "And the peace of God which transcends all understanding will guard your hearts and your minds in Christ Jesus." This peace is a divine gift that comes from God alone. It doesn't depend on our circumstances or on everything going the way we want it to. It's not a peace that we can manufacture on our own. It's a peace that only God can give. And it's a peace that will guard your heart and mind when life feels overwhelming. Think about it. When everything around you is falling apart, when you feel like you're drowning in the weight of the world, God offers you his peace. This peace doesn't mean that all your problems go away, but it does mean that you can face those problems with confidence, knowing that God is with you. This peace enables you to stay calm in the storm, trusting that God is in control and that he will bring you through it. Jesus speaks about this peace in John 14:27, saying, "Peace I leave with you, my peace I give you. I do not give to you as the world gives. Do not let your hearts be troubled, and do not be afraid." This peace is different from anything the world offers. The world's peace is fleeting. It's based on circumstances. And when those circumstances change, the peace fades away. But God's peace is unshakable. It's anchored in his presence, his promises, and his eternal love for us. One of the most beautiful examples of God's peace in action is found in the life of Jesus during the storm on the Sea of Galilee. In Mark 4:35-41, a great storm arose while Jesus and his disciples were on a boat. The disciples were terrified and they woke Jesus, who was peacefully sleeping through the storm. Jesus calmly spoke to the storm, saying, "Quiet, be still." And immediately the storm ceased. The disciples were amazed and asked each other, "Who is this? Even the wind and the waves obey him." Jesus demonstrated that his peace isn't disturbed by circumstances. He can bring peace to the storms in our lives. When you invite God's peace into your heart, he can give you calmness in the midst of your own storms. That peace guards your heart. It protects you from fear, anxiety, and despair. And it gives you strength to move forward, even when you feel weak. Now, you might be wondering, how do I access this peace? How can I experience the peace that surpasses all understanding? It starts by trusting God with your fears and anxieties. It comes through prayer and surrender, by letting go of the need to control everything and simply resting in his presence. And it's strengthened as you grow in your relationship with God, knowing that he is with you in every moment and that his peace is available to you. In Isaiah 26:3, we are promised, "You will keep in perfect peace those whose minds are steadfast because they trust in you." This peace is not dependent on the world's circumstances. It's dependent on trusting in God. The more we trust Him, the more we experience His perfect peace. Number 7, trusting God with your future, knowing He has a plan for you. One of the most powerful things we can do in the midst of our pain and weariness is trust that God has a plan for our future. It's easy to get stuck in the present, to focus on the difficulties we face right now, and to feel overwhelmed by what seems like an uncertain future. But what if we could shift our perspective and look ahead with confidence, knowing that God is not only with us in our pain, but He's also preparing something good for us in the future? I know when life is hard, it's often hard to see a way forward. It's easy to wonder, does God really have a purpose for me? Does He care about what's ahead in my life? But let me assure you, God has a plan for you, and it's a good plan, a perfect plan, a plan filled with hope, purpose, and a future that is beyond your imagination. Jeremiah 29:11 tells us, "For I know the plans I have for you, declares the Lord. Plans to prosper you and not to harm you, plans to give you a hope and a future." This is such an important truth to cling to. God is not a God of confusion or aimlessness. He has a specific plan for your life, and His plan is full of hope. Even if you can't see it now, even if your current circumstances feel bleak, God's promise is that He is working everything together for your good. I've often found that in moments of pain, it's hard to see how things could ever get better. But trust me when I say this, God is always at work, even when we can't see it. Just think of the story of Joseph again. His life was filled with betrayal, hardship, and years of suffering. But in the end, God's plan was revealed, and Joseph found himself in a position where he could save not only his family, but an entire nation from famine. What he couldn't understand in the moment, he saw clearly when God's plan unfolded. It's the same with us. Even in our struggles, God is moving things into place for our future. His plan is bigger than our pain. It's also important to remember that God's plan isn't just about what we want or expect. It's about His purpose for us. And sometimes that purpose involves seasons of waiting, growing, and learning. Sometimes God has to take us through challenges to refine us, to build our character, and to prepare us for what He has ahead. Trusting in God's plan means trusting in His wisdom, even when it doesn't make sense to us right now. Psalm 139:16 says, "Your eyes saw my unformed body. All the days ordained for me were written in your book before one of them came to be." Before you were born, God already had a plan for your life. He knew every step you would take, every challenge you would face, and every blessing that would come your way. And He is guiding you every step of the way, leading you toward His perfect will. So no matter how uncertain your future may seem today, know this: God has a purpose for you. You are not drifting aimlessly. You are walking in the path He has set for you, and He will lead you to a place of fulfillment, peace, and blessing. Trust in His plan, even when you can't see all the details yet. He's got it under control. Conclusion: holding on to God's promises amid the struggles. As we come to the end of this message, I want to remind you of something incredibly important. God sees your pain, He hears your cries, and He knows that you are tired. But more than that, He is with you in it all. And He is offering you something so beautiful: His peace, His rest, and His guidance. All you have to do is trust Him. I know that life can feel overwhelming at times. It's easy to get discouraged, to wonder if God has forgotten you, or to feel like the pain will never end. But I want you to hold on to the promises of God. He sees you, He hears you, and He is right there beside you, walking through this with you. In the midst of the storm, remember that God's peace is available to you. When you are tired, He offers you rest. When you are weary, He promises to renew your strength. And when you don't know what the future holds, you can trust that God is already there, preparing the way for you. And here's the final truth I want you to hold on to: you are never alone. God is with you in every moment, in every struggle, and in every season. You don't have to carry your burdens alone. He is ready to take them from you and give you His peace and strength in return. So let me encourage you today. Whatever you are facing, whatever pain you are enduring, leave it in God's hands. Trust that He sees you, hears you, and has a perfect plan for your life. Surrender your struggles to Him and allow His peace to fill your heart. God is faithful, and he will never leave you. His love for you is constant, unchanging, and eternal. I want to leave you with these words from Isaiah 41:10. So do not fear, for I am with you. Do not be dismayed, for I am your God. I will strengthen you and help you. I will uphold you with my righteous right hand. God is with you. He sees your pain, he hears your cry, and he is walking with you through it all. Trust him. Surrender your burdens to him, and know that you are loved, you are cared for, and you are never alone.